He announced 2.5 weeks ago that he's retiring from his twice-a-week column. He's a former Wall Street Journal editor, the father of Reaganomics, the head of policy department of Treasury. And, of course, his new book is How the Economy Was Lost, The War of the Worlds, Paul Craig Roberts. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts is with us, and before he sails off into the sunset, at least for a while, taking a break, he's agreed to do a couple interviews with us. He did one last week, and now he's back on tax day this week to talk about the economy, the value-added taxes, all the things, the carbon taxes they're calling for, and what he talked about last week, the systematic destruction by design of our economy, the total conversion to basically Mexico or another third world nation where you have a tiny elite and a giant underclass. Dr. Roberts, great to have you here with us today, sir.
Pleased to be with you, Alex.
You look good there with your Skype connection. I see you've got Napoleon Bonaparte on the wall behind you.
Yes, well, somebody gave me that some years ago when the French, the president of France gave me the French Legion of Honor. And so I can't remember who it was. Somebody gave me this very romantic picture of a copy. This is a copy of the romantic portrayal of Napoleon that's in the Louvre in Paris.
Wow. Yeah, you never brag about all the laurels you've gotten, one of the top 10 economists living on the planet. You know the drill. We're going to break in about 3 minutes, but you wanted to come on tax day. We're honored to have you here where you won't be censored. Break it down for us.
Well, you know, Alex, one of the great myths is that Americans are free people. And once upon a time they were, but they've not been free since 1913. Because once you have an income tax, you no longer own your own labor. And the historic definition of a free person is a person who owns his own labor. If you don't own your own labor, you are a serf or a slave. So all Americans are either serfs or slaves, depending on the bracket. There are no free Americans, and have not been any free Americans since 1913. So when you hear our leaders, such as George W. Bush, talk about we have freedom and democracy, you certainly don't have freedom. You're a serf. All serfs were required to turn over 20, 30% of their labor time to the government of their day. A slave has to turn over about half of his labor time to his owner. And Americans fall in between those two ranges. So every American who works and earns an income is either serf or slave or in between that margin. And that is simply the historic definition of a free person agreed to by the liberals, by Karl Marx, by the conservatives, by all historians. That is the definition of a free person. We don't meet that definition, and people should be aware of this. And that's the real message of April 15. It reminds you every year that you're not a free man or woman. You are a serf of the government who has a claim to, what, 1/3 of your income?
Or more. Stay there, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. We'll look at the history of the income tax, how it's been accelerating and expanding, and a lot more, and how we try to shake off this bondage. And your phone calls. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts with us in the next hour. We're very honored to have him. Many times when Congressman Ron Paul is on Fox or CNN or MSNBC, they'll say, you're against the government. You hate the government. How are we supposed to fund our country? And many times he's standing in the Capitol or the Capitol's behind him, and he says, well, we built this Capitol. Our country had a 10% growth rate on average until 1913 when we got the income tax. That you will notice is in the Communist Manifesto. So is a private central bank. And we have been turned into serfs, not just with the income tax, but property tax is a rent. Serfs paid a property tax as well. And since 1913, it just expands and expands and expands and expands. Now the bankers, Volcker and others, want a value-added tax, sales taxes, carbon taxes. It's all being announced. Former Wall Street Journal editor, for those that just joined us, father of Reaganomics. is our guest, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, author of How the Economy Was Lost, The War of the Worlds. Paul Craig Roberts is with us here live today on Tax Day. Sir, please continue where you left off in the last segment, our journey from liberty to servitude and serfdom.
Oh, Alex, the phone has started ringing. Can I get up and turn it off?
Sure, go ahead. You got to love live TV here and radio. And for those that just joined us, we are live at prisonplanet.tv. You can see all the great awards Dr. Roberts has in the back, including the Legion of Merit from France. That's their highest award. He is something else. Never even knew he had that. But gotta love live TV. Okay, Dr. Roberts, continuing, recapping our journey to serfdom, and now it's only accelerating deeper into bondage.
Well, the main point, Alex, was that a free person owns his own labor. And an income tax means the government has the first claim on your labor, just like feudal lords did, or a slave master. And so Americans are not free and haven't been for almost a century now. We're 3 years short of a century of living as serfs, while the government tells us that we have freedom. Under the Constitution, the income tax is unconstitutional, and certainly nobody in the latter part of the 18th century was going to propose an income tax, since it was so close to the time that serfs were becoming free labor as opposed to serfs. And so the notion of having the government have a claim on your labor would have been seen as a step back into the Dark Ages or into the medieval period. And so how did we get the income tax? Well, the Democrats wanted it to get the rich. And they got one passed, and it was ruled unconstitutional, and they had to have a constitutional amendment. And the way they got it, if my memory serves, the Republicans wanted a higher tariff to protect the industries. During our great growth period, we had high tariffs. We did not develop on the basis of free trade. So in order to get the tariff, the Democrats said, look, tariffs are like sales taxes, and they're regressive, and the people have to pay it who don't have a lot of money. And so if you will go along with letting us have a go at a constitutional amendment on the income tax, we'll let you have your tariff. And the Republicans all said, well, the states will never pass this, so let's make the deal so we can get a higher tariff. So they made the deal, and when it went out to the states looked at it and said, well, look how much money you have to have before you even hit a 1% income tax rate. Nobody in our state has that much money. We don't care if this passes. It doesn't affect us. And so it passed because the majority of the states came to the conclusion that nobody in the state had an income that large. But of course, as soon as it's in, World War I starts. And of course, they want to finance the war. And so all of a sudden, the thresholds at which the tax comes in are lowered, the rates at which are charged are raised, and the whole population is almost subject to the income tax, which was only going to be for the rich. Well, that's how it happened. That's how it came into effect. It was a miscalculation as a part of a deal to be able to raise a tariff in exchange for giving the Democrats a go at a constitutional amendment to make income tax permissible.
Well, Dr. Roberts, let me add a caveat before you continue. We notice in the same year, 1913, we get the income tax to now fund the new central bank that so many of our forefathers had fought against. As Thomas Jefferson said, if you allow private corporations and banks to issue currency and credit, you will wake up homeless on the continent your forefathers conquered. And we also